Hello, and welcome back to the Book Marketing Tips and Author Success Podcast. This is Penny Sansevieri.
And Amy Cornell.
And I think this is a show. So, Amy, this show was your idea. I think this show is one that is long overdue. Do you want to give us a little bit of framework of what we're talking about today?
Yeah, we want to talk about publicity. And we want to talk about what it is and how it can work for you if you approach it correctly. Because I think that's the biggest problem that we see is that authors think of publicity as one thing, when in reality, it's not going to do the work you want it to unless you're realistic about how to use it and you're more strategic. It's much more than just that big breakout moment, you know?
Right. And I think one of the things that we see a lot with authors who come to us saying, I really want to be on whatever big morning show or whatever it is that a lot of times they're using that. So if you're looking at marketing like a funnel, they're using that as a top of funnel kind of approach. Like that's the first thing that I'm going to lead with in my book marketing. And unless you already have you're an established author, you're an established brand, people know who you are, for all the reasons that we're going to unpack in this episode, that generally doesn't work. The first thing is that I think is we're talking about is, and part of the reason why authors lead with publicity a lot of times is because they think that it is a direct link to book sales. And I am here to tell you, 25 years, I'm telling you right now, that is not always the case. In fact, there is a statistic out, and this was something that I shared with Amy in the green room, but it's still, every time I say it, I'm just like, oh my gosh, this just makes me, it's a bit of reality. Market research consistently shows that only 1% to 2% of cold audiences convert immediately.
Ooh.
Right. And what that means is, and that's part of the reason why I said that a lot of times authors use this as top of funnel, as opposed to like, okay, well, now I have a brand and people know who I am and yada, yada, yada. And, and then that, they have that expectation of sales, which then, potentially may be a little bit better than the author who just launched their book yesterday. Expecting, and this apparently the show, we should have just named the show the Buzzkill Show, because that's how we're obviously leading off all the things. But, when authors expect that anything, related to television or radio or online media is going to lead to an immediate sales spike. And just to be clear, Amy, I think we should sort of reframe. When we're talking about publicity, we are really talking about broadcast media, radio, television, magazines, potentially, magazines, although magazines people tend to sit with a little bit longer. Mm-hmm. So, online media as well, can fall kind of into this bucket. But a lot of times when authors say that they want publicity, and Amy, you see this a lot on the front end, probably more than I do. The majority of them, what they're talking about is I want to be on the Today Show, or I want to be on some television, just something like that. I want to be on The View, just for an example, right?
Right. They're talking big audiences. Yeah. Exactly. For sure.
Yeah. And big audiences, we talked about this in the green room too. Big audiences don't necessarily, there's not necessarily a blip that correlates with that.
No, definitely not. A lot of times, like Penny said, that statistic blows my mind.
I know.
So often, what's tricky about it, especially for authors, especially for books, is that you're inserting yourself into situations where people aren't necessarily looking to discover books. And we are so overstimulated nowadays. There is so much getting thrown at us that just inserting yourself into conversations where it's not natural, where it's not expected, and that's not why people show up there, rarely has the kind of return that most people expect it to.
Right, exactly. In fact, so years ago, we had an author who was on Oprah, and the book was available for purchase, and the author sold 100 books from
100 books.
being on the show. And when Oprah had her show, I mean, that was always like, oh, I got to get on Oprah. I remember one time at Book Expo America, a bunch of us publicists had like this cocktail party celebrating her last show because we didn't have to hear anymore, I want to be on Oprah.
Except we do hear that all the time.
We used to hear that. I remember, I mean, she, 15 years ago when you started, she still had her show. We used to hear that all the time. So,
Yep. And then people asked for it for another 10 years, not realizing she was no longer on the air.
I had somebody ask me that last week. I'm like, I mean, I realize she does some shows on the Auction Network and whatnot, but for the most part, yeah, there's no Oprah show. No.
Right. She's not giving out cars anymore.
Right. Car for you.
Right. And then we've had other examples too, which sound like amazing opportunities. We've had clients that have purchased space in Times Square.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Against our recommendations, and we are always very honest with people. We don't say don't do this, but spend all your money with us. That is not, there's no ego involved in that. We legitimately respond based on what is going to convert and what really makes sense. And so we said, full stop, this is not what you need to be doing. And they did it anyway. And we've had more than a handful of authors purchase like big advertising space like this. And not once has anybody come back to tell us how great it was and how well it worked out.
Yeah.
And how many books they sold.
Yeah.
And I would assume they would love to do that because we're like, no, that's not a great idea. That's really where you shouldn't be spending your time and your investment and things like that. So I'm sure they would have loved to tell us how wrong we were. And not once has anybody come back to do that.
Yeah. The whole Times Square thing, I remember when, and like you said, we had a few authors who've done that. That literally just sends me over the edge. Like, who is in Times, like the Times Square? So think about your audience in Times Square. Like, sorry, but your audience is just like, there are a bunch of tourists, there's a bunch of people. And frankly, Times Square, like, does anybody pay attention to the billboards in Times Square? Sorry. You know what I mean? I mean, it sounds really glamorous. It's such you know what I mean? Don't buy for your ego, guys. Listen, do not buy for your ego. There's another example, and this is actually, I think, before we started working together, I had an author who decided that they wanted to buy a movie theater ad. And at that time, I mean, this is maybe 18 years ago. At that time, it was a lot of money. I mean, it was a small theater, but it was a major release, and I think it was like $5,000 or something for the ad to run just one time. Hello.
Yeah. Oof.
It wasn't running like consistently for all of the showings, but there was no way to, like, who's sitting at a movie theater thinking, like, you're thinking about popcorn and you're thinking about the movie and you're thinking, you know what I mean? Like,
no, and this is long before QR codes or anything like that. So I just imagine like they're expecting a bunch of people to like get their handbags out and dig for their notepad with their tiny flashlight and write this down. Like, nope, what? No.
Yeah.
Like it's not going to happen. I mean, obviously different age, but still. And I realize it sounds like we're ragging on this, but the reason is because publicity, the right kind of publicity, and if you're inserting yourself into the right conversations that actually make sense for your audience and then leveraging that actually works. So that is really why, we're here.
It is. And, publicity itself doesn't sell the book. It makes the reader more likely to say yes when they see it again. So one of the things that we want to anchor to, as now we've had our fun. So that was really fun. That was 8 minutes of like Amy and Penny talking about all the crazy things we've seen, but anchoring publicity to things that are realistic. So there's nothing wrong with publicity. I don't like publicity when a book first launches, unless the author starts off with like a lot of, credibility, because there's just so much competition and it's really, really hard to place them. But publicity can give you credibility, discoverability, content, social proof.
Yep.
All of those things that, really, and, like as seen on kind of like when you see those, I mean, that's impressive, right?
Right. And I like the idea of reframing publicity as an asset and not an outcome.
Yes.
Right.
Yes,
it's something to use. It's not a goal, you know? Yeah. It is not an end result. It's something that you need to utilize. It's a tool, right?
Right. Exactly. And, nonfiction authors, I mean, obviously it's kind of, it feels like a much easier alignment than fiction authors, but, fiction authors, I've done fiction authors to do very well with, big national publicity. It's a little bit harder to get if you've written fiction. I mean, that's why you really have to, you have to build, you have to, already be building awareness again,
Right.
not, this is not a top of funnel kind of idea, but, anything to me, anything that helps you increase discoverability, whether you're fiction or nonfiction, or you've written poetry or whatever, anything that helps you increase discoverability is important.
I agree. And I think to your point, Penny, how you said you don't love it to kick off. And I think that makes so much sense, especially for fiction. Like
Yeah.
publicity is not something you go after with your debut novel. You know what I
Right.
mean? It's something you build toward if you're making smart strategic choices and paying attention to your brand along the way, then it's absolutely something that you can consider. And for nonfiction, we've done plenty of shows about it, but it really depends on what you're bringing to the table, what
Yeah.
you have access to, and what conversations you insert yourself into.
Yeah, exactly. Do you want to talk a little bit about, I mean, I know we've kind of already addressed why publicity doesn't necessarily
Right.
on
But I
its own.
think, let's cut away all of our snarky comments, like you said.
Yeah, I know.
Like our
We
poking
had our
fun,
fun, Amy. Now we have to get back
right.
to business.
But the reality is, and Penny said this at one point, there's really no clear next step for the audience with publicity for a book
Yes.
a lot of the times. You know what I mean? It's like you're there, they go, okay, and then they move on with their life. And there's no follow-up system with publicity. Like there's no email, there's no content, there's no retargeting happening. I mean, even Amazon, for as much as we rag on Amazon, is working harder for you than publicity will, because Amazon at least sends follow-up emails when people land on your book page. Like I've been sharing those with our clients, Penny, because we've been, we follow all of our clients, and I've been sharing because I think most authors don't realize what Amazon does behind the scenes for targeting and selling. And it's actually very cool. But so you don't get that with publicity,
Right.
and it's also, oh, go ahead.
No. I just want to, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I just want to interject. One of the biggest reasons that publicity fails is because it's isolated.
Yes.
Right. So anyway, sorry, go on. But that just kind of came to mind. I wanted to jump in there.
No, absolutely. Like to your point, it's completely disconnected from the rest of everything else that you're doing. It's just kind of out there, and there's no direct, like we said, there's no direct next step for the audience to take. And realistically, like we've talked about on this show and other shows, everything is distracting, so the chances of somebody, you have publicity, you have some coverage, you have this big ad somewhere, you've nailed this big interview, but they don't do anything with it because that is not why they're there. You know what I mean? Again, I think a lot of publicity, a lot of big publicity, a lot of very expensive publicity sounds really great. But again, it really is like inserting yourself into a conversation you had no business being in the first place.
That's very, very true. And I think, if you look at the typical buyer behavior, so they see it, they forget it, they see it again, they recognize it, they consider it, they see it again, and then maybe they'll buy it.
Right.
And that's part of the reason why. And when authors do the go-to of, I want to be on publicity, I want to be on national television, I just want publicity, that's where it starts to become isolated. And you're basically just kicking the entire buyer journey to the curb and forgetting that even exists, when that is, in fact, how you're actually going to sell books.
Yes. Exactly.
Okay. So did we finish up? Did we cover everything in that in terms of,
Yeah, I think we just, the important part is that y'all understand, like, this is not just us saying, like, it's really hard to get because you're not special enough. That's not it. It's really just
not at all.
most of the time, it's just not designed for the way book discovery happens and the way authors really end up reaching people and converting people.
Right. Exactly. And I think this next segment, like how to actually use publicity. We've done a lot of shows on this, so we're not going to spend a huge amount of time on this in particular, but I think that and you know what, this is not just how to use publicity. This is how to use anything that you get.
Right.
You want to make sure that you add everything, obviously, to your websites, pull quotes as seen in, on your book or on your Amazon page or whatever. And the thing about it is, though, too, we have a show coming up on local media, why local media is important. I finished my book on, local media, local marketing for authors. And that's not actually what it's called, but, These are um these are all stepping stones, right? That's one of the reasons why you never want to turn down an interview. You never want to turn down an opportunity because everything builds on everything else, right? But every time that you're doing any kind of a segment, use it, share it, use it, put it on your website, put it on your media room, and just make sure that you are maximizing every single opportunity that's come to you. I don't care if you were on the Today Show or if you were on like Good Morning, Wichita, like everything, absolutely everything matters and everything has to be reused because it's really, it's eye candy, right? I mean, when you go to somebody's media room and you see a lot of stuff on there, you think, oh, wow, this author's, been featured in a lot of places. I mean, you may not even know half the shows that this author has been on or publications or whatever, but it helps you to leverage it to get, more visibility.
Exactly. Like we've said it before, I think the bare minimum, you should find 3 other ways to use it. And usually there's many more than 3. But I've been having a lot of those conversations with our clients lately, which on one hand is awesome because we're having clients write us and go, I got this or I got that or this award came through and all these things. And they're letting us know, like, how can you guys use it? And just based on what we do and depending on what it is, I mean, there's only so many ways that we can, but it's amazing how many authors, these great things happen and they're not pre-programmed to immediately add it to their website or get it added to their Amazon page. You know what I mean? Or to share it on social media. And it's like that needs to you need to reframe anything, like Penny said, anything positive that happens, every little win. You should have a short list. Put that reminder on your desk of the top, 5 things you need to update immediately. And then the next 5 things that you can do with it in the near future,
Yeah, exactly. And I would say, we've done a ton of shows on this. Use and reuse make sure that you are maximizing every single feature. Not only is it a great way to enhance and build your brand, build your author brand and get out there and show people that people are interested in your book. People like what other people like.
Mm-hmm.
So again, even if they've never watched Good Morning Wichita or whatever, doesn't matter. People like what other people like. So you definitely want to expand on that. Okay. So the compounding effect, this is a really big deal. And I really want to share this. If you want to kick this off, because I think that we, as authors oftentimes overlook the compounding effect of all of this stuff. And that's part of the reason why when an author comes to us and says, I just want to do publicity, I just want to hire you. Like, we never do that. Just spoiler alert. If you come to Amy and you say, I just want to do publicity, that's literally never going to happen. The compounding effect of all of this, which is why I mentioned early on in the show, if you want to do publicity, great. I think that's awesome. That's an awesome goal. Start compounding other things, build on that, because generally speaking, these major morning shows are not going to put a green author on. And I don't mean...
No, absolutely not.
Right? I mean, I don't mean an author that's necessarily writing about, environmental stuff. That's not what I mean when I say green. I mean an author who has literally no experience.
Mm-hmm.
Amy, you want to talk us? I hope I haven't stomped all over all your talking points. But anyway, do you want to do? Sorry,
no,
I did.
No, but it's very true. One feature will rarely move the needle,
Absolutely.
Circle back to our opening chuckles about all the things.
I know. They're great stories.
Right. So don't look at publicity as your chance at a breakout moment where you get to skip the line and skip all these other things that we talk about on these shows incessantly that everybody should be doing. Publicity is not it's not the cheat code for that. Right.
Right. Exactly.
You really have to think of it as an asset to use. And it basically, like Penny said, it gives you credibility. It adds to your resume. It makes you more likely to be trusted. Having that media room, like she said, it doesn't matter if everybody recognizes all the different things that you've done. It just shows that other people, other outlets, other platforms believed you had what it took and believed you had something to offer. And that's amazing. That's what you have to focus on. Like getting mentioned one time, like we've talked about, easily forgotten, especially if you're showing up in conversations where you didn't belong in the first place. Nobody knows what to do with that. But as Penny alluded to, repeat exposure, so you pay a lot of money for this one thing, and then go figure, it's not until 3 or 4 impressions down the road where maybe they see a BookBub ad, or you pop up on their Amazon search where they go, oh yeah, I forgot about that book. Let me look at it again.
Yeah.
Books are rarely purchased as impulse items the first time they hear about it. It's just not how it works.
Well, and I do that a lot when I buy books. I'm like, oh yeah, now I've seen this, I've seen this book multiple times. I think, oh, this is something that this is definitely something that I.
Same. I've seen books where I'm like, okay, cover's good, sounds interesting, but I have a lot of other books to read first. But then the next time I see it, Penny, all of a sudden it's got 50 reviews. And I'm like, okay, clearly some people are paying attention. Now I'm a little more interested, right?
Yeah.
And I'm not saying 50 reviews is the magic number, but truly, like, shoppers all have those kind of, they're looking to check certain boxes, and it's different for different people. But rarely is it just, oh, I have nothing better to do and I have nothing on my to be read list and I completely ran out of books and I'm just going to take a chance on somebody I've never heard of. Like, that is a very unusual book discovery process.
It's a very unusual book discovery process. The other thing is too, is we talked about this in the green room. We were sort of brainstorming some other show ideas. Familiarity reduces perceived risk.
Mm-hmm.
And books are different than any other product that's out there because there are studies that show that consumers are significantly more likely to choose brands they recognize even without detailed knowledge. But brands, okay, so we always talk about the author brand, but brands and books. So if you're buying like a new LED red light face mask, it's a little bit different than when you're buying a book because that book is asking for your time. Whereas like your little red light mask is asking you for 5 minutes a day or whatever. Your book isn't asking for an investment. So, but in terms of, familiarity, that is where the compounding effect can really come in. So when consumers are seeing something over and over again, that really makes a difference. So if you came into this episode thinking that this was going to be all about publicity, I realize we didn't talk about, we have other shows on pitching. Go back and listen to those. We have tons of shows actually on pitching. This is really about helping you to set the stage for a better funnel, really.
Right.
Because
really. And a better use of your investment, honestly.
And right, exactly. And a smarter investment. Because, recognition of a book and seeing it multiple times and using publicity or any kind of marketing that you're doing strategically for that, that's really where you get into that sweet spot. And that's where the magic really starts to happen. All right. So did we cover everything in the show?
We did.
I think we did. Now, here's the interesting thing. So we also have a listener question, and I thought this really fit well into the show in particular. So devoted listener and debut author, I love that they started this off. Following as much of your advice as possible. Sorry, I have to add that. I love that. By the way, we love the props. We are not above. We love compliments. So,
oh yeah.
Amy and I were also talking about in the green room. We have a whole list of listener questions on this. And one of them was basically just telling us how fabulous we are. And Amy's like, should we remove that? I'm like, oh, heck no. I love reading that when we get into listener questions. One question I keep returning to, does conventional book marketing work similarly or against books that require deep reader trust? I'm thinking of books like Grief, Spiritual Struggle, Caregiver Exhaustion, where readers aren't browsing, they're searching. Discoverability is still required, but trusted recommendations seem to be the real fuel. This is such a brilliant question, and here's why. If you've written a book on grief just because you've had a loss in your life, and that's awful, and I get it, it's going to be a really hard sell.
Yes.
I mean, Amy, talk about that. So this is a really good question for Amy to answer. Like, not because you vet a lot of these authors.
Yeah.
You vet all of them that come through. And that's the first, especially for a nonfiction book, that's the first thing you look for, right? Is the credibility of the author.
Right. I want to know. And a lot of times my first email back to them is, tell me more about yourself. Tell me about your background in this. Tell me why you decided to write this book.
Mm-hmm.
Because while every experience is absolutely valid, like Penny said, that, if you wrote a book on grief, that is awful. But that is something that a lot of people have shared.
Yes.
A lot of people have experienced that. So, yes, absolutely. When you say conventional book marketing, I think that's also kind of, subjective in terms of what you find conventional.
Yes.
But I think a lot of what we talk about is that, it's your foundation. So there's a lot of book marketing strategies that can work for a lot of different types of books and markets, but it's what you're bringing to the table and what you're giving people when they get there. Are you going to convert them? Are you going to be able to convince them that this is what they're looking for, that it's worth their time, that it's worth, you know what I mean? Are you answering the right questions? Things like that.
Yeah.
So I think it's less about, does conventional book marketing work? I mean, again, that's a loaded question, but I think absolutely the person that sent this in is right. They're thinking in the right terms of, no, it's not the same. You're not going to convert somebody the same way you are if you've written genre fiction.
Right, exactly. And that's really where, and I don't care how you published your book. For me, I read a lot of nonfiction. I'm looking at the credibility of the author in terms of, like, what's their experience in this space? What's their experience with, whatever, like if I'm reading a business book or something, you'd better, I'm looking for the receipts, basically, is the short form, the way to say it. So I think that is actually a really good question. We could probably do an entire show around that too.
Yeah, we might need to, because I think, there's somebody recently that reached out to us, Penny, that on the surface, I was thinking, like, this is, you know what I mean? I don't know how much we can get involved here. But then after I asked some questions and I got the behind the scenes, that more background on where this book came from, I realized that the author just had missed a bunch of opportunities in how they were presenting their book. And their brand and it was like, whoa, so there is a lot of substance there. It's just, that's when we talk about, you get too close to your own work to realize what's missing.
Yeah, that's actually a really big one, because we, as authors, sometimes we're our own worst enemies, right? And we do, and it's funny because Amy, and look, I do book marketing and publicity for a living. Amy has sometimes come at me with, like, Penny, your bio needs to be stronger. You need to mention this. We are our own worst enemies, right? So it's really a good idea if you're thinking about getting into, the market that requires, quote unquote, deep reader trust, have somebody evaluate that for you. And we're happy to do it. That this is not a plug for our services, but we're happy to do that. Have somebody evaluate your expertise, because you may be really ready to launch this and you have a ton of expertise and a ton of background, but you need to be more forthcoming about that. And that's the other thing too. And that's why it's always good to get a second, I think, to get another objective opinion about where you are with your expertise for writing this book. And in some cases, like I've got authors who have gotten in, forewords and endorsements from people who have loads and loads of credibility in the industry as they're writing the book. And in many cases that works too. So yeah, I think we may want to do another a show on this, because this was Brianna, we really appreciate this question. And we always appreciate the compliment, but this was a really great question. I love that. And I don't think enough authors, I think it was smart to ask that. I don't think that enough authors really spend a lot of time thinking about that.
Yep. Thank you.
So thank you so much. Listen, we love your questions. I think on last week's show, I may have neglected to give the podcast phone number, but excuse me, the number, the text number. Apparently I can't talk. We're yet at the end of the show and I'm like losing the thread of all the things. So we have a conversation going. You can text the word podcast to 888-402-8940. And that's a direct way to communicate with both Amy and myself. Send us your show ideas, send us your questions. It's how we got this question. What did you like? What did you didn't like about the show? We always want to be improving. So the communication, the texting is a great way to stay in touch with us. Text the word podcast to 888-402-8940. We would love to hear from you. And please leave a review wherever you listen to reviews. We love those as well. Thank you so much. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.